Hello and welcome to Press TV's debate. I'm Marzia Hashimi. Thanks so much for being with us. Last year, American President Donald Trump said American troops are in Syria for the oil. And now Syrian media is reporting that the U.S. has taken oil from Kurdish-occupied Syrian oil fields and sent the crude by convoy to Iraq. Recently, Kurdish forces in northeast Syria signed an agreement with an American oil company. This despite that it is illegal, according to international law, and has been condemned by the Syrian government. But exactly what does it all mean? We're going to try to take a look at this situation on this debate. I'd like to start it off crossing over to Damascus, joined by Press TV's Mohammed Ali. Mohammed Ali, good to have you with us. Well, fill us in on the latest of what's going on.
Yes, according to Syrian state media, a U.S. convoy carrying stolen Syrian oil crossed from Syria through an illegal border crossing point towards Iraq. And in detail, the U.S. convoy was made up of 20 tankers and trucks carrying that oil that was extracted and stolen from oil wells in Hasakeh governorate northeast of Syria. And this convoy crossed from the Al-Walid illegal crossing point through Al-Yarubiya area all the way towards Iraq. Now, there is no official comment yet or response from the Syrian officials with regards to this particular incident. However, the Syrian government officials in the past years have always condemned all of the actions by the United States inside Syria, saying that they are only destructive. For example, the U.S.-led coalition that has killed in its airstrikes a large number of Syrian people, displaced many of them, destroyed the infrastructure, and also, in many cases, attacked Syrian army positions just prior to any Daesh attack on the ground, facilitating, meaning the Daesh attacks on the Syrian government areas and Syrian army positions. And this, of course, incident today of transporting that oil comes following several attempts by the United States in which it brought a large number of vehicles that were loaded with weapons and military and logistic equipment to the vicinity of those oil fields.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that update out of Damascus. That's Press TV's Mohammed Ali. I'd like to welcome now to the program out of Belfast, author and Middle East affairs expert, Shaath. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, when we look at, I mentioned in my intro about the words from U.S. President Donald Trump saying basically we're in Syria for the oil. Why wasn't he condemned for saying that? And now we see that actually they are stealing the oil from Syria and sending it to Iraq. What's going to happen? Why aren't they being condemned?
All along, the United States of America's action was designed for hegemony in the region to control the oil and wealth, the resources in that region, and then it's a strategic geopolitical position. That is the strategy of the United States of America, because controlling the oil, it doesn't mean the United States of America just wanted for itself. It wanted to take money out of it, take the resources, as well deny competitors like China and other countries to buy it from the region. Today, the Kurdish militias in Iraq or in Syria, the S.D.F in Syria, they are puppets of the United States of America. And the S.D.F, the Kurdish militants, they extract daily, roughly in North Syria, from Al-Hasakeh province alone, around 30,000 barrels. This convoy your correspondent spoke about, it's remind us with Daesh tankers used to cross in massive convoys from Syria with looted oil to Turkey and being protected by the Americans' Marines. If we want to come to the American deal, this company called Delta Crescent Energy made a deal with the Kurdish forces, the S.D.F militants, and now both of them, these the United States of America's forces and their Kurdish stooges, are partners in looting the Al-Hasakeh province oil. The American company involved in that got the blessing of the United States of America. So the Treasury Department Office of Foreign Assets Control allows it to operate in Syria. That means there is no sanctions going to be imposed in this company, which America, of course, imposes sanctions in anybody comes near Syria. That means this company got the approval of the highest office, the White House.
All right. Let me bring in my next guest, turn to London. Sami Hamdi, editor-in-chief of the International Interest. Thanks so much for being with us. You heard our previous guest, Saab, actually talking about basically this oil company getting the blessings from the U.S. As a matter of fact, I just want to read something that Mike Pompeo, as a matter of fact, said about this company. It's called Delta Crescent Energy. And what he says is that when he found out, when it was announced that this had happened, that there was a deal made between the Kurds and this American company, oil company, he said, well, actually, the deal took longer than planned to happen, but now it is operational. The absolute arrogance, Sami, I want to look at, and basically feeling that they are above the law and nothing is going to happen, it appears. Your take?
I think it's symptomatic of the Syrian conflict in that Syria no longer has any sovereignty in order to be able to exert itself on its own affairs, on its own resources. Russia has taken the Tartus and Hmeimim base. The US now is trying to export oil from the Kurdish areas. Iran now itself is able to exert influence, and it's able to use that Iraqi-Syria border in order to fulfill its own ambitions and fulfill its own interest to protect itself from US sanctions. So in other words, I don't think Syria has any sovereignty really to assert itself in any of these issues. And that's why I think this latest news that's coming out that the US is trying to export oil now from the Kurdish areas makes sense within this context. This idea that given that Turkey controls the northwest, given that Russia is dominant over Syrian decision-making, given that Iran is under pressure from Donald Trump, given that the US have no allies on the ground except the Kurds, it makes sense that the US now would try to facilitate increased funding for the Kurds, increased logistical support, enabling them to export oil, particularly as the US comes under increasing pressure from Turkey, which is upset that the US is supporting the Kurds because they believe it will come at the expense of their own internal security as these Kurds try to secure an independent or autonomous state using Syrian land and then expand, according to them, into Turkey and perhaps even into Iraq. So I think it's a sign of the tragedy of what Syria has become, this country which was a major power in the Middle East, a major power in the Arab world, a power that could exert itself on other regional powers. Today we see it hamstrung by the agendas of foreign nations, and in situations such as this, quite simply so impotent that it cannot impose itself to prevent such a transgression on its sovereignty.
Saab, your take on the whole role of these so-called international countries, or I will say international entity, such as the United Nations. We don't hear condemnation. We don't hear the UN Secretary General talking about sanctioning the United States. So with this being the backdrop, a government like that one in Damascus, where can they go? They have complained about this situation and condemned it, but what is going to happen? Where can they go?
I accept the point. Since the international community, it's actually it's an umbrella for the United States of America, and it's been designed after 1945, the Second World War, as a de facto system controlled even by the United States, while even the Soviet Union existed at the time. And today it's totally the world order came after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, which George Bush Sr. declared it at the time. It's the U.S. is ruling, and it's now the period of their U.S. reign internationally. It's today China and Russia and Iran. The three countries, mainly three countries, are trying to challenge the United States of America. And the United States of America is weaker today. And that's why you hear the slogan which Trump uses, he wants to make America great again. when you see Iran, even under the sanctions, it can send its oil from Tehran to Caracas in the backyard of the United States of America, and the United States cannot challenge it. When you see Iran revenge against the assassination of its late General Soleimani and attack the Americans, Ain al-Assad, in Iraq, without the Americans trying to retaliate again. And today it's been even the vice president or the nominee for the vice president in the United States of America in the election said most of them have brain damage today because of that attack. So we understand they are not in total hegemony. So Syria have friends today, but we have to remember at the beginning of what they call it Arab Spring in Syria, these factions, which is supposed to be civilians, targeted the air defense system in Syria, the radars and the rocket systems and all of that. Since then, Syria become an open ground to the Israeli airplanes and jet fighters to attack, and that's why we can see the Americans' airplanes are reigning supreme in the skies of Syria. But situation is not as bad as used to be 5 years ago. This can bring to the equation Russia and Iran. If Syria will be lost in the battle to the United States of America, they'll suffer a lot. That's why we see Iran insisting and the resistance insisting, and Russia and today China as well in helping Syria. So there is hope in the future.
Well, Sami, the U.S. used the so-called Caesar Act to implement sanctions on Syria for alleged war crimes, and yet we see the Americans had supported terrorists inside Syrian territory, now occupying Syria and stealing its natural resources. So again, I want to go back to the international entities such as the United Nations. Is it basically discrediting itself by not saying anything? And are we getting to the point where more and more countries will be understanding that there has to be another option, because this is not the option for countries without the might of those on the Security Council?
I think that's a bit too black and white, and I think the answer of the other guest was a bit too black and white. I think the international community, the main problem that it has is the question of legitimacy. Who is legitimate in Syria? Is it the Assad government? Is it the people who rose up against him? Is it the militias now that are fighting on the ground? Who represents Syria today? And I think the notion that the US supported anybody in Syria is quite simply incorrect, because the US put pressure on the Saudis, on the UAE, on Turkey and the others for supporting the Syria groups, because Obama was claiming that they were backing the terrorist groups. But the international community, the reason why it is unable to act with regards to Syria is quite simply because it has no control over the powers that are involved there, and therefore it cannot present any viable roadmap. Turkey will not allow Assad to enter the northern territories, Idlib and beyond, because Turkey believes that that's a threat to its own internal security. Russia will not allow Assad to agree to any deal that threatens Russia's newfound interest, and Iran will not allow Assad to agree to any deal that means the curbing of its militias or curbing of its fighters that have rescued Assad from the people who revolted against him. So I think with the international community, it's not necessary that they don't want to find a solution for Syria, it's that they cannot. And the US, I think, far from having a plan, the US had no strategy. It had no idea who to support. It had no idea what to do. It prevented those who rose against Assad from receiving weapons and pressured the Saudis to stop giving them weapons. And in the meantime, it didn't provide any framework for Assad to rescue himself, nor provide any framework for negotiations with Russia or Iran or Turkey. And that's why we see that the Astana process is far more influential now between Iran, Turkey and Russia than the Geneva process. Okay. So I think with regards to the international community, the reality is that in Syria, it is force that dictates, and that force is as a result of Russian-Iranian intervention that's rescued Assad from the Turkey, Saudi, UAE-backed groups that were seeking to overthrow him.
So basically you're saying this is out, you've named regional players, but basically what you're saying, Sami, is that the United States didn't play a role in all of this, or the Brits didn't play a role when you're talking about, for example,
they didn't play a role, but they didn't have a strategy.
Okay. Well, Saib, your take. Go ahead, Saib.
You see, I want to refer to Donald Trump's, during the election in 2016, in his campaign, he said, and he stated, Daesh and all of these outfits are the product of the United States, America's foreign policy. Hillary Clinton herself stated that in a video. He can refer to it, Sami, in the internet, about how the United States of America developed its assets. These terrorists, they call them assets, foreign policies assets. So all of these outfits in Syria, which is Sami claiming United States of America didn't help or is poorly trying to control them, they were terror tools. The United States of America used them to destroy Syria for many reasons. One of the reasons, it's the oil pipes gas war, which is they wanted to bring from Qatar through Syria to Europe to stand against the domination of the Russian gas. It's again a state who refused to recognize Israel to accept the existence of Israel in the region, since Palestine is considered part of a greater Syria. That's another one. Any country in the region, take it from Iraq to Libya to anywhere, represented any kind of a threat to the Zionist entity, it have to be dismantled, destroyed. Many issues in there. So the Kurdish themselves, these militants who were supported as well by the United States of America in Iraq, and we seen their role in helping the American occupation in 2003 of Iraq. Today they play the same role in Iraq, in Syria. But the United States of America will not going to stay for long in there, since Donald Trump himself, he promised to withdraw the troops from Syria, and then he said he's going to leave only these forces to control the Syrian oil, to loot the Syrian oil. At some stage, when the American forces leave Syria and not be present in Syria, these stooges like the S.D.F. Kurdish forces, they'll collapse. And the Syrian people rose against them, if we can follow the news as well. So the American occupation in Syria, as it did happen before in Iraq, will be faced and will be defeated.
Well, Sami, you made it sound that it's just basically it's all these countries are involved because of their own interests, and the U.S., as you said, basically didn't have a particular strategy to get involved there. Although we know, I mean, if we refer to even what General Wesley Clark of the U.S. said, and this was back in 2001, that of course Syria was on that list of what he said, 7 countries in 5 years to take out. So that's another day that we can get more into that. But in general now, so what's the answer? So we have these different interests, this different situation that's taking place. We have now Syrian resources being taken out of the country. What's the key now? What is key for Damascus at this point in time?
I think the terrorism issue works in favor of the U.S. It allows the U.S. to continue to maintain a presence, the presence of ISIS and the like. And I think when we say that the U.S. created these terrorist groups, I don't think they created them directly, but indirectly, in the sense that they didn't back the opposition groups that fought Assad. When they were crushed and defeated, it allowed the space for these terrorist groups to start emerging, and that completely undermined the morality of the people who rose against the Assad movement. Then the direct answer to your question is, I believe that the Astana process that is taking place, the leveraging between Russia and Turkey to try to facilitate some sort of coalition agreement between the opposition and between Assad, is the best way forward. I think the reason why we're seeing an intensification in Idlib in recent times is because Assad is the one who is hysterical at the notion that Iran, Russia might force him to accept some sort of concession and accept some sort of constitutional committee that will be formed between him and the opposition council. Assad is worried that the Iranians and the Russians will agree to Turkish demands because the wider regional issues trying to curb the US now requires that Tehran, Moscow, and Ankara work together in order to contain that influence, particularly as Trump seeks to wind down US influence.
All right,
so
let me get Saab in this. I'm so sorry, Sami, but we're almost out of time. Saab, your take.
You see, if you want to look at the neighboring countries regarding the main issue, we can see Iran itself said the deal is violation of Syrian sovereignty, and plundering of the Syrian natural resources, which means looting. Turkey, the same thing. Turkey described will help in strengthening terrorism in the region, while Syria itself, as the state who's concerned with this, consider it these terror outfits in the northeast of Syria, are looting the resources with the help of the United States of America, and none of the Turkish militants in there being recognized by the state. And as I said, the people in there rose against them. The United States of America will not going to be supporting them forever in that region, since Syria is a greater war to liberate itself from these imperialist terror plots, which try to destabilize not just Syria, the whole region, as we saw, and to make then this region will be controlled by its own functioning state, the Zionist entity. This is the design. It will not gonna happen, as we noticed today from even the battles happened in Asia Minor, and there was Turkey supporting Azerbaijan, and then against Armenia. All of that as well going to be used to destabilize Iran. And in a way, we can see there who's involved as well in there. We can notice the Israelis involved, the Americans involved in Azerbaijan.
Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time. I appreciate both of you being with me on this debate. Saeb Shaath, author and Middle East expert out of Belfast, and out of London, Sami Hamdi, editor-in-chief of International Interests. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on another debate. I'm Marzieh Hashemi, signing out for myself and all the crew right here in Tehran. See you next time.